paid a minimum wage. Now, almost every startup company I know will violate this rule at some point. You know, you can get away with not paying founders, but they're going to start hiring people. Saying, well, do you work for equity? We'll give you options. Will you defer your wage until we get funded? Well, almost everybody does that. It's a risky game to play because there is a potential for a wage claim. Now, the liability might be capped, but it still is an issue. It's going to come up in due diligence, and it's going to come up in a financing or an exit. So it's something to be aware of. More importantly, is that if taxes are not withheld on income paid to an employee, because a startup company doesn't have a lot of money perhaps, well, the responsible persons or the officers of the company are personally responsible for that. It's one of the rare instances where an individual can be personally responsible for a corporate debt. It's something we run into frequently and something to be very careful about. So that's what I wanted to mention about tax withholding. And oh, one last thing. A lot of people think, well, I know how we'll deal with that problem. You would have been my employee. We're going to make you an independent contractor. We're going to call you a consultant and not an employee. That doesn't solve the problem. In fact, the revenue authorities have gotten very aggressive on proper characterization of people in order to collect this payroll tax. And in fact, the law now in California is that not only are you, the individual founders, personally responsible for this tax if you do not withhold it for wages and pay it over, but I, as a lawyer, will be personally responsible if I advise you to do it. And that's a pretty extreme circumstance in the United States. You rarely see that. That tells you how important this issue is to the tax authorities. Foreign personnel, one of the first things you'll want to do, of course, is bring people over. Or if you can't hire locally, you may bring people over. And I think you folks probably know about the visa requirements, B1 business visitor, H1B a business visa. EB-5, I just want to mention, because the law changed in the last few years to really encourage what they call an investor-related visa. In other words, anybody with $1 million that can employ 10 people can get a permanent visa in the United States. Right? That's the EB-5. But what's changed in the law is that there are now funds working. So there are funds being marketed mostly in Asia the money will go into the fund, then the fund will go out and find a company to buy and allocate that company back to one of the investors, and then they get a visa. That's an attractive source of revenue, actually. It hasn't worked well in the technology field because it has to be relatively labor intensive, but it's something everybody ought to consider. And when I have companies come to me looking for money, first thing I do is I think, gee, are they an EB-5 fund candidate? Because that's relatively easy money, you know, once you fit the parameters. And finally, there's this idea of EB-6, the startup company visa, which is pending. It's not law, but John Kerry introduced this last year. Startup company, $100,000, 2 years. If you can raise $500,000 in either revenue or investment in 2 years, you get the EB-6 visa. So it's not law yet, but it's pending, and we're all hoping it passes. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. We talked about employee rights. Their company. Now I want to mention real estate. I don't know if there's any just hardcore real estate investors here in the audience, but real estate investment in the United States is its own separate special topic. There's a whole different regime that applies to that. And just keep in mind that, for example, you can invest, you can buy stock in a U.S. company, and you can sell the stock, you will pay no U.S. tax. You can invest in a U.S. venture fund. The fund will have income, will pay that income out to you. You will pay no U.S. tax. If you put that same money into real estate, and you sell the real estate, you will pay U.S. tax. That's all I want to point out. It is a different and more aggressive regime. We talked about withholding taxes. I think we mentioned treaties. The one thing I want to pause on here is that there is a very significant movement afoot with regard to international reporting of transactions. And currently all U.S. persons who have signature authority over a foreign bank account have to report